Hey, it's Nicole Hemsoth here from Situation Publishing. Today we'll be talking about why ransomware hackers love Microsoft 365 and what you can do to thwart it. We're joined by experts from Rubrik, and I'll hand it over to you to give a quick introduction and background. Let's start with you, Kim.
Yeah, absolutely. So, thanks everyone for joining us today. I appreciate it. Kim Lambert. I am a principal product marketing manager at Rubrik. I've been here for a little over a year now, but I've worked in a bunch of different spaces. So, telecom, cybersecurity, financial services. But now I am at Rubrik here, and I am very much focused on protection for Microsoft 365, all things cloud, disaster recovery, and things like that. And I'm joined today here by my technical guru, Drew Russell. So I'll let Drew introduce himself.
Hey everyone, thanks for the handoff there, Kim. Like she mentioned, my name is Drew Russell, and I'm part of our Microsoft security practice here at Rubrik. And then more specifically, I am 100% focused around Microsoft 365 and all of the fun that comes with that. So my job is to talk to our customers across the globe, understand how they are thinking about 365 in the context of their data security conversations. And then just as importantly, working a lot with our peers over on the Microsoft side to get their take on the overall landscape as well. So, something I never thought I'd be focusing on. I know when I joined Rubrik, but here I am living and breathing it, 10 hours a day at this point. So extremely popular topic for us across the board. So looking forward to digging into it more here.
Well, speaking of people who didn't expect to be in a position that they're in, let's talk about why ransomware hackers do love Microsoft 365. This is a pretty hot button issue. Kim, lay the groundwork for us on what's happening, why this matters.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the question of the hour, right? Why do they love it? Basically, we're hearing at our data security organization at Rubrik that our customers, outside security experts, Microsoft themselves, that Microsoft 365, it has become a tier one business critical application for organizations, right? So, attackers are smart though. They know this, right? They know that the organizations host a ton of critical data, confidential data within their Microsoft 365 footprint, right? So that's why they are going to go after it. That's why they love it. We see Microsoft 365 suffering from email breaches, even attackers, and this is interesting, using legitimate enterprise tools within Microsoft 365, those native tools that they have, but in a way that helps them carry out their malicious actions, and then holding data for ransom. So, it's a big problem. But there's also many incidents too, when you think about Microsoft 365, where there's maybe inadvertent deletion of critical files too. So, unfortunately, there are scenarios where they're finding that data is unrecoverable, just using Microsoft tools alone. So, many of these customer organizations, right, that we talk to, they say that this is maybe a monthly, even weekly occurrence. I've talked to some that are saying that it's happened all the time, where they're asked to bring back data that has been deleted accidentally. Who knows what happens from the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. And this is business critical data that can have a really big impact on operations if it's gone. So, many customers of Microsoft 365 are just finding themselves in the state of being unprotected from data loss, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you would think a lot of this stuff was already cooked into Microsoft 365. I think we expect all the tools to be in place, right? But it's actually not the case, is it?
It's not. People think that they are protected off the bat with it, but there's actually this missing layer, and we'll dive into that a little bit more. But I mean, that's some of the stuff that I was talking about with Microsoft 365 and it being that tier one, business critical app. If you think about it, it's only been a matter of time for this to occur, right? We've got remote work, you've got hybrid work, even more so with the pandemic, right? Adoption, usage of Microsoft 365, it's growing. So, you've got all of that, but you may not be protected. So just know that there's this kind of false sense of security that you have with this as you're adopting all of these services. Like you're saying, Nicole, people are thinking they're protective, but they're increasing this amount of business critical data that lives in Microsoft 365. If we look at the data Microsoft provides, it tells the exact same story here, right? You've got growth across the Microsoft 365 suite. Organizations are just super reliant on shared documents in OneDrive, Exchange emails, Microsoft Teams. That's an all-day communication thing, right? I can hear the Teams button going off in my husband's computer right now, so I hear that all day long, right? But just saying that's exactly how we got here, right? It's all the time, and this quick growth has just meant that they've instituted new functionalities, but not necessarily protected them. So in their overall security strategy, they really have this limited line of defense for Microsoft 365, and most organizations admit to having none at all.
I think Microsoft even recommends a third-party solution for this. Is that right, Drew? Is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. And in multiple locations, you can find those recommendations, everything from their, terms of services agreement to, looking at their documentation on how to respond to a ransomware attack. So they've always been pretty clear in their messaging around this that, hey, we handle the infrastructure side, we handle all of the, the day-to-day's operation, but at the end of the day, data is always in the purview of the customer's responsibility.
So, Kim, in terms of this last line defense, what does this look like in the real world? How does this play out? What does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, it's something where security experts. I brought that up earlier. They're all saying that this is the target, right? Microsoft 365 is a gold mine, and we say that a lot at Rubrik. It's a gold mine, but it's not our words. It's actually coming from a security research group, Mandiant. So if you haven't heard of them, they're actually cybersecurity incident response. That's their whole business, right? So these are the folks that the Fortune 500 companies of the world are calling for various threat scenarios. So if a company experiences a breach, Mandiant's called in to kind of figure out how that breach happened, but then also to help them get back online. So these are the security researchers that that have the real world experience, right? They're the ones that are seeing this happen. And what they're seeing is these targeted threat groups investing a lot of time and a lot of money into not only understanding Microsoft 365, so that's what's happening, but simultaneously how to attack it. So they are spending a lot of time, a lot of money trying to do that. And just kind of read the news and you'll know what I mean. I know Drew here keeps really good tabs on what's happening in this threat landscape. He talks about that all the time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's shockingly easy to really find headline after headline talking about these attacks that are happening. Most folks are familiar with the SolarWinds breach. I know when I first started talking about this, it was the biggest deal at the time, but since then it's been dwarfed. What most folks don't realize is, at the heart of it was a Microsoft 365 attack. It wasn't the core infrastructure. Instead, it was the identity layer that's breached. And that kind of lives at these major attack vectors that everybody knows about. And it's not just these large, attacks, these large companies being affected as well. The stat that always kind of blows my mind is the one up here on the top left. 71% of organizations have experienced some kind of Microsoft 365 account takeover. Time and time again, this is the target for today's advanced threat groups, and everybody is being affected by it. But at the same time, they've only really started treating 365 data security really kind of seriously for the first time. So that's kind of what we're living and breathing. And the conversations we're having with the CISOs is, what keeps you up at night? And what they're talking about is, yes, the external threats are a major part of it. It's something we're concerned about. But then just as concerning, it's these internal situations. Now that all the data lives in these platforms, what are these, whether it is a malicious insider who is going through and doing damage and causing all this deletion of data, or like the example up here talks about at KPMG, they actually deleted 145,000 users, chat data very much accidentally. They went to affect a single account, applied the policy to the entire ecosystem, and click of a button, the data was gone. Obviously, that is a massive deployment in terms of, user base. KPMG is a large organization, a lot of visibility into Microsoft, above and beyond the fact that this is making headlines in major newspapers. But Microsoft themselves, confirmed the situation. Sorry, the data's gone. We can't bring it back. That's going back to Nicole. What you're asking about is, what does Microsoft say about this? It's always on the data is always on the purview of the customer.
I wonder if they were surprised to find that they weren't covered in terms of recovery.
That's
point.
A great question. I would imagine they were. Obviously I've never talked to them specifically about this, but time and time again, every day, 5 or 6 customers are telling me the exact same thing. Hey, I'm good to go. My data can't be deleted. It can't be removed. So that is absolutely the general kind of viewpoint of the industry.
That makes sense. I mean, and listen, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. I see all this stuff, but when we talk to customers, you start talking with them, and they, of course, they start thinking, all right, what would I do if my Microsoft 365 environment was attacked by ransomware? What if my team actually encountered a situation where I needed to recover critical files for our business? Could I say for a fact that I'd be able to recover, right? So it kind of leads into that. You see all this stuff happening, and you start to think, well, darn, am I covered too? Would I be able to recover my data? And then would I be able to recover it quickly, right? So that's a really big thing. So if you're the IT person, and I'm thinking maybe some of the people in our audience are that person, maybe you'd be the one that's kind of left in the hot seat should something happen. So you kind of got to think about that. You're the one holding up productivity. You're the one holding up business continuity. And, if you want to have a last line of defense for Microsoft 365, which, so many people don't, I think it's really important then to understand protection for Microsoft 365 as part of your overall defense in depth strategy. So, Drew talked to a lot of customers about this, and it definitely makes sense to me, this concept of defense in depth.
Yeah. So after, customers are asking, what happens in these situations? How am I protected? The very first thing they also ask as a follow-up is, how do I even begin to answer that question? So I always like to frame it in, first and foremost, let's take a step back and understand SaaS data security. And the best way to do that is to relate it back to what most folks know, right? How does this relate to the enterprise environment that they're familiar with? What does this, overall defense in depth strategy look like on that side of the house? This is very much the de facto standard across the board. It's all about the different layers of security you can have in place, because you have to assume compromise. You have to assume one of these layers is going to breach at some point, right? It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So how many different layers of protection can you have in place from these threat groups at the top level and your underlying data? So this is kind of the first and foremost is the level set. Okay, what are you doing today? And at the same time, start relating that to this SaaS-based world. If we look at those layers on the previous slide, one of the major benefits of these SaaS solutions is that those are all managed by the solution provider now, right? It's one of the major reasons why organizations switch to these SaaS tools. It just extracts away a lot of the complexity and puts it on the purview of an organization. And usually it is organizations with budgets above and beyond what the vast majority of companies can do out in the ecosystem. Obviously, this is the case with Microsoft, one of the largest companies in the globe. At the same time, this is the the tools that they use themselves, right? They consume Microsoft 365, so it's really important for them to secure it, not only for their purposes, but obviously for their customers as well. So these layers are really, really secure from a day-to-day basis in the SaaS world. But that doesn't mean there's no layers of security that you have to be concerned about. Really what happens is these layers are what I call being redefined. So instead of your perimeter security, your firewall security, et cetera, at the top of the stack, it's now about the identity and authentication layers. How do I access these tools? And in the SaaS-based world, these layers, by design, are going to be able to be accessed across the globe, right? They are public internet-facing login, identity, and authentication layers that you have to think about from that perspective as well. So it's not moving these layers all together. Instead of it's redirecting it to, this more SaaS-based world. If we look at this in the context of Microsoft 365 specifically, at the top is every SaaS provider has these identity authentication layers, but then Microsoft does an amazing job of adding additional layers to that conversation as well. A lot of built-in native tools and functionality that are available by default out of the box that customers have the ability to apply. So it's a pretty comprehensive story that is part of the overall platform for 365 specifically. To dig into those a little bit more, what do those layers look like? So we have to understand those a little more in depth to get a kind of grasp around what this defense and depth strategy look like in context of 365. So the slide I have pulled up here is a direct screenshot from the Microsoft documentation around how they view this concept of zero trust data security. And then, it's kind of a really important element to understand. It's all about, if I would summarize this, it's all about being able to comply with different legal and regulatory standards. And then the way they have that broken up is into these 4 broad categories. And, underneath these categories live a plethora of different tools to get the job done. But if I work them away from the left to the right here of, being able to know your data, understand what's out there. Obviously, if you don't know what's in your environment, you can't protect it. So first and foremost, the tools are available to get a good idea of what's out there. From there, it's kind of working the way of the stack to where you can do different things like protect the data by encrypting it, restricting access, or preventing data loss by restricting oversharing, capabilities, different things like that. And this last section of govern your data is the one I always like to dig into a little more in depth, just because the vast majority of our customers are assuming that the tools underneath this section are what are protecting them on a day in, day out basis from these external and internal threats. So if I would double click into this a little bit more in depth, again, this is a direct screen grab from the Microsoft documentation. The way they have this broken up is into kind of 2 main categories of information. At the top here being information governance, which is kind of your day-to-day data that's living in 365 itself. All of the workloads you would expect. Call it 99% of your data. The main tools that customers leverage, in this information governance section is retention policies. This is a policy that allows you to do something like, hey, keep the data in the ecosystem for a year. After that year period of time, remove it. The concept being, if it's not part of your 365 ecosystem, you don't have to worry about the encryption. You don't have to worry about it being overshared. So how do I leverage these tools to remove it? The next section is, highlighted by the diamond images in this case, which I think is the perfect image in this, right? It's a very, very small subset of data in your ecosystem that you want to have a additional layer of protection. It's all about legal or compliance aspects. And the main tool customers use in this are litigation hold. Think of this as a hard lock on your data. In essence, it creates a secondary copy that was directly beside your primary data. So that way, no matter what, this data is being stored in this location. It's like I said, a hard lock. It can't be deleted. It can't be modified. It's always going to be there. So, in the conversations with customers, these are by far the 2 main tools they bring up. Call it 99% of the time. If I ask them, what are you doing today? It's one of these tools, 2 tools that are being mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, and if you think about when Drew had that slide for the 4 categories, and then obviously that big one for govern your data, as part of the whole defense and depth strategy. So kind of going back to this, what happens in the SaaS world for Microsoft 365 specifically, if those identification, the authentication layers are breached, right? What happens if those first fundamental layers of protection are attacked? So, where are you left in an attack scenario, right? Using only those native tools from Microsoft. So Drew saying, the retention policies, like litigation hold. And, I actually really like to look at this in kind of a visual sort of diagram, if you'd allow me to do that. It's kind of interesting because the way we most often see breaches is actually through compromise of admin credentials, right? So, there's a lot of different ways that can actually happen. once an attacker has those credentials, they kind of have the keys to the kingdom. They can do really almost anything. So, what they typically do is start by exporting data to their command and control servers. Then they delete some or all of your data by what? Manipulating those retention policies, all the stuff that Drew was saying people bring up is, here's what we have, here's what we do. And then they drop the ransom note, right? So that's what happens. So what do you do next? Do you restore from retention? Okay, yeah, that's your first option that you think about. But keep in mind, those retention policies, they may have been manipulated to delete the data in the first place. And then, they can use the delete functionality of retention policies to automatically remove all the data from the environment. And then when that happens, there's just nothing left to recover. But, another option, okay, litigation hold. Drew talked about that, right? So you could possibly try to restore it, but litigation hold, it's not a super straightforward process. It could take days. So it's just not designed for actual recovery. Putting your organization on litigation hold, it's just not a viable backup strategy. It's difficult to manage. There's no guarantee of recovery if you've been attacked. So then what happens? You're stuck negotiating or you're stuck paying the ransom. And then remember in all of this too, we're talking about Microsoft 365, but your data centers, your on-prem, the rest of your cloud environment, that may have been breached as well. So you're obviously in need of a more holistic data protection strategy if you find yourself in that sort of situation. But but now you can kind of see where you're actually at. This is how some of this stuff plays out, and this is what people are telling Drew that that they're relying on. This is what they're saying they have in place. It's just not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. If we go back to the visual we started with, where this is the kind of the de facto standard in place for the defense and in-depth strategy for 365, the question was, if these top layers are breached, what happens? Now that we've, one kind of provided an overview of what these tools look like on the 365 side, and then more importantly, Kim kind of walked through, what does an example attack scenario look like? We kind of have the better understanding that, hey, in this case, the native tools themselves, while they do provide a lot of function and protection in specific situations, they can actually be used to attack you. Which is one, I think, the unique aspects of the data security conversation in 365, right? I don't know of any other tools that customers are using to protect their primary data that can actually be used to compromise them in some form or fashion. So, what that translates to is at the end of the day, all of these different layers that are in place by default are basically moot at this point. They're no longer relevant. The threat groups have bypassed all of them, and they now have access to your underlying data.
Yeah, and that we talked about this too. That if you look at the shared responsibility model in the cloud, you think about Microsoft's stance on this, right? They're pretty clear in what they're saying in their online documentation, right? So these are actual screenshots of what they have. Up in their documentation. So this is, shared responsibility. It's like a cloud framework, right? Where the cloud vendor, in this case, Microsoft is the one responsible for keeping their cloud functional, right? That's what they're saying they do, but they're saying, okay, the customer is actually responsible for protecting their data. So, on the left side here, this is actually a screenshot from Microsoft's best practices documentation on how to recover from a ransomware attack. So they have this up on their site. And the very first step in this actually is for customers to verify their backups. And not just that, but to verify your offline backups. So they're saying, okay, if you have offline backups, you should be able to restore the situation. And then here on the right, talking about service availability, this is the Microsoft Services Agreement itself, right? So this is where they're specifically recommending back up your content, use a third-party backup service like Rubrik, right? So they've been really clear to customers that you as a Microsoft 365 customer need to take care of this aspect of your data security, take control of it. But there's some good news, and so I'd love to do a little shameless plug here. But Microsoft has actually recently gotten out of this this kind of neutral zone that they've been in. So where they've been kind of passively saying, we're not responsible for recovery of your data. And that's why they've actually taken an equity stake in the company Drew and I work for, in Rubrik. So they're investing in Rubrik. Now they've got skin in the game, right? So we work really, really closely with them as a strategic partner. And this partnership just works so well because we have a joint vision for our joint customers. We're customer-focused organizations to protect both Rubrik and Microsoft 365 customers from ransomware attacks. And this allows us at Rubrik to be in an incredibly favorable position, right? So we can help you secure your data in the cloud, including your Microsoft 365 environment. And then we have the technical innovation and then the technical support interlock with Microsoft to be able to bring the best services to our customers. And this is because at the end of the day, it all comes down to not only what Microsoft is great at, so it's all that stuff that that Drew was saying, they've got compliance and availability covered, but also the ability to recover your data when you need to. So this is how Microsoft and Rubrik just work so well together. You've got the native tools from Microsoft, but like we talked about, they're designed for data classification, legal compliance, retention management. And then on top of all of those functions with Rubrik, you've then got actual data recovery taken care of. So recovery from external, internal threats, and a more holistic defense in depth strategy. So going back to that visual of the anatomy of a ransomware attack, you kind of insert Rubrik into the equation, and then you have an isolated copy of your data. It's separate from your Microsoft 365 account, and then this backup copy, it's inaccessible through your Microsoft 365 admin account. So if there's accidental deletion, if there is malicious activity, it's deleting your data, it's corrupting the data, the process to restore that lost data is actually quite simple. And if you're using Rubrik to protect your on-prem and your cloud workloads, it's all done through the same environment. So if you're working in a hybrid environment, that's especially good for you. Think about the simplicity and kind of the ease of use across the board. I know we've been talking quite a bit, so I'd actually love to show you a demo that Drew has done. So can we run that, please?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing this in action, and afterwards I have a few questions to ask. Yeah, go ahead. Let's start the demo.
To start the demo, we'll land on what we call the Microsoft 365 dashboard. My favorite aspect of the dashboard is actually how it came to be. So every engineer who implemented and actually designed the dashboard was an admin in a previous life. So they really took a step back and say, hey, if this was my environment, what would I want to see on a daily basis to understand, are my backups working as expected? The really kind of the highlight of that on the dashboard is the compliance card here. So this is going to be tied to our SLA domains. So if you're not familiar with the SLA domains, just think of this as an easy way to define how often to take a backup, then how long to store that backup. Something like take a backup once a day, store for 30 days, or take a backup every 4 hours, stored for a year. Really flexible on that side, no limitations around that. But once you apply that SLA to the Rubrik system, we'll automatically start the protection of the underlying users, sites, or teams. If we're hitting those backup marks, if you tell us to back up every 4 hours and we're doing that, we mark that specific object as being compliant. If we have any issues for whatever reason, we mark it as out of compliance. So we're just kind of highlighting that overall compliance rate first and foremost in the dashboard as a great indicator to show if everything is working as you would expect. We have the same kind of information down here at the bottom, just divided up by each of the individual data sources for 365, and then showing a weekly view to kind of show trends for the protection task as well. The last card I'll call out a little more specifically here is my personal favorite, the Microsoft 365 status card. So what we're doing in this case is reaching out to the Microsoft Service Health API, which is going to be tied directly to your specific 365 subscription. And then basically tell us, is everything working on that side of the house or not? If there's an outage, we'll get an alert and highlight that information in the dashboard here. That way, if you do log into the system and see your compliance rate dropping or a higher rate of errors and warnings showing up, you won't have to go through 12 layers of troubleshooting to realize the issue is on the Microsoft side itself. Instead, that information is highlighted first and foremost in the dashboard. Before we get into what a restoration looks like, the one section I'll highlight here specifically is how do we assign those SLA domains to the 365 ecosystem. So we actually have a couple ways to do it, starting at the, I call it the top level here, of being able to have this global policy in place. And then you can assign these SLAs to each of these data sources, whether it's Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, or Teams. Usually what we see customers doing here is taking a generic catch-all SLA. So take that backup once a day, keep it for 15 days, something like that. That way, every user in the ecosystem has that base level of protection. And that way, every user you onboard also is automatically going to have that protection assignment to them as well. Along with being able to do it at the global level here, we also can do it at the Azure AD group level. So think of something like your legal department, or maybe you want to protect their mailboxes more frequently than the intern who started yesterday. So what we can do is take that Azure AD group and then manage protection of that and assign it to a separate SLA domain as well. But last but not least, you can also do this at a granular level as well. So think of being able to assign it at the individual Exchange or the individual OneDrive level as well. So that is the different ways to assign the SLA domains. So once you're in this, the main user interface here for restorations, what I'll point out here is an example of how to do a restore on a OneDrive user. In this case, I'll use my specific OneDrive account. The thing I'll highlight here is no matter which data source we're talking about, whether it's OneDrive, Exchange, SharePoint, Teams, the UI is going to be, call it 99% identical, just tweaked a little bit for the specific metadata for OneDrive or Exchange. So in this case, we always have the status view, which shows a quick high-level overview of what's going on with the specific OneDrive account. So we can see things like it's assigned to the bronze SLA, or we've backed up a terabyte of data, etc. And then on the right side here is what we call the calendar view. This is kind of the heart of how you do a restoration job in the Rubrik UI. There's a couple ways to do it. So we always have the search option here at the top. We have a couple of different pieces of metadata that we can filter by or search by. So we could search by a OneDrive file name or when it was created or modified. Once we switch to the Exchange UI, we'll see a couple different pieces of metadata, like who it was sent from or who it was sent to. And that's what I mean by slightly tweaked based off of the data source protecting. Each of the views I'll show here always has this main calendar view where you can see the green check mark indicating a backup of some sort happened on that day. So maybe I want to go back to the first of the month and kick off a restore job from there. Looks like I was logged out. So let me log back in here. And what we can do is select a point in time that we can recover from. So in this case, we are taking a daily snapshot. So all I need to do is kick off the recovery UI. We can do the restoration job at the entire OneDrive level, or we can start getting into this as granular as we need to. So maybe we want to mix and match different folders, or we can get down to an individual file level as well. So from here, we have a couple of different restoration options available. Usually the main one we see customers doing is bringing it back to the original location or recovering to another user as well. Think of a scenario like an employee leaves the organization and the manager wants access to it. You can restore to any user in the ecosystem as well. We also have a download from cloud option, which will enable you to, in essence, bypass the Microsoft APIs themselves. And instead of restoring it to the 365 environment, we'll provide a zip file directly through the Rubrik UI that you can download the selected file from as well. So in this case, I will just bring it back to my original location. And actually what I want to do here is do it at the entire OneDrive level. And then I will just kick off that recovery aspect from there. What we can see down here is an alert saying, hey, we started the restoration process and everything is kind of working as expected. So what's actually happening on the back end here is we are creating a new container in the Azure Kubernetes service to dynamically scale up the environment as needed. So once we kick off a restore job or a backup job, we'll always create this new container. And this is one of the ways the Rubrik system itself is able to scale to meet the demands of any environment up to 100,000 users is what we support today. And then more importantly, allows us to work within the constraints of the underlying Microsoft APIs, which by its nature is the most difficult aspect to manage in the 365 space. And then just to switch over to the Exchange tab, just to show that the UI is almost identical across the board, we can see the same status view. We see the same snapshot view. Like I mentioned, you can do different search criteria, just tweaked a little bit from the OneDrive UI that we saw. But then the calendar view is going to be almost identical as well. We see the same point in time that we can recover from. Kick off a recovery UI that is almost identical. So in this case, we can either restore the mailbox or the calendar for it. In this case, I just want to do a quick mailbox restore. And then from here, we can select the entire mailbox itself or get it into the in-place archive as well. And then very similar for the OneDrive side of the house, we can mix and match different folders, or we can start getting into this and getting as granular as we need to. So in this case, maybe I only want to restore a individual email. So we can see the similar recovery options to bring it back to the original user or restore any other user that's part of the ecosystem. So I'll kick off that job real quick. And then I'll switch over to the events tab just to kind of show that you can view these various jobs at the global level as well. So we can see all of our Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, or Teams jobs and show different aspects of that as well. So that is the quick down and dirty demo of the UI on the Microsoft side. By design, this is going to be as simple as possible. We want to extract away all of the complexities that live in the system, but then at the same time, give you the flexibility to manage the system in a way that makes sense for you.
Let me just recap, right? So we talked about a fully hosted SaaS-based solution. That's what this is. It enables fast recovery, just find a point in time, identify the user, the folder, the files, and then just click to restore your data back into your Microsoft 365 account. And then remember that, your data is safe. It's kept separate from the Microsoft 365 tenant, right? So it's as recommended by Microsoft. Remember that documentation. So for ransomware protection, there's no direct login to the Rubrik backup from your Microsoft account. And to get to the backups, you'd actually have to go through Rubrik, and we're protected by two-factor authentication, by role-based access, and the logical air gap that Drew talked about as well. So you always have a way to be able to get your data back, whatever the situation is. And then what customers really appreciate is how that protection it's integrated, right? But with the rest of the Microsoft SaaS-based platform, with the rest of the Rubrik SaaS-based platform, that is. So you're really getting that unified visibility across the board for on-prem environments, cloud, all-in-one control plane.
All right, great. And also thank you for that demo. That was enlightening. Hey, I have a few questions here. One of them is kind of basic. As you're implementing this in your enterprise, do you call Microsoft for support or do you call Rubrik? How does the support breakdown work?
Yeah. I can take that. It's a good question. It's Rubrik. You call us, right? And we've kind of got this expedition, escalation path into Microsoft if we need to engage with them. So that's kind of a perk of the partnership, right? A good example would maybe be, think about some sort of failure scenario where maybe you had to do mass restores. So, although the way that we provision allows us to really be performant in terms of ingest and restore, maybe there's a scenario for mass recovery where maybe we haven't necessarily scaled to that point yet. So maybe we need to do some further provisioning to recover. Maybe we need to get throttled less. And there's scenarios like that occasionally in the past. And what we do is we jointly work with Microsoft to uncap these APIs in a really kind of specific circumstance. So for our product, you engage with Rubrik. We're the ones in our partnership just easily enables us to engage and interact with Microsoft if we need to. But
all right, that's helpful. Is Rubrik able to provide evidence of compliance like PCI DSS, for instance? How do you look at that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. We have various industry credentials, and we can share that with with anybody with the right mutual agreements in place, of course. So we can share credentials on our SaaS control plane and and whatnot, and then we also have this event stream and and this reporting database within our tool that can kind of further be used to satisfy the requirements and capabilities to help you meet them internally. So a good example is the SLA compliance report that you can run with Rubrik. And when you protect workloads using Rubrik, you built these policies, these SLA domain policies. You define the RPO for the workload that they're assigned to. And we have means by which you can deploy that policy assigned to each of those workloads. You can say run a report and run the report basically that says here's the policy that's assigned. How many days would you like those workloads that have been compliant with the assigned policy? You set the window on the report. You've essentially got a report for auditors that you can hand over and say, I'm compliant on each and every one of these days in accordance with my policies, and these map to these business requirements. So, yes, the short answer is yes. We are credentialed, certified. We can help you. You do that yourself by means of all of our workflows with our SLAs.
Sure. A lot of moving parts for all ends, it sounds like. And that kind of raises another point. What about folks who are right now on-prem, and there's still plenty of organizations that are on-prem, and they're saying, well, we're going to burst out into the cloud, or we're going to migrate everything to the cloud. How does Rubrik follow them through their infrastructure journey, whether they're on-prem, in the cloud, or both?
Yeah,
want to take that one through?
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely are focused around a organization's entire infrastructure. So, while obviously the conversation here is very much a SaaS-based tool, the overall goal of the Rubrik platform is to live where the customer lives. If they're fully on-prem, great. If they're fully in the cloud, that's great too. But then more importantly, like you mentioned, Nicole, a lot of organizations are in this hybrid mode or this kind of transition. So how do we support them in their journey, no matter what the phase is? And, the overall goal of the Rubrik platform is to do that through a single interface. So, if there is these worst case scenarios where the environment's compromised, like Kim was talking about earlier, it's not just 365 being attacked, it's all of the workloads simultaneously breached. How do we allow organizations to respond to those situations in a way that is identical, no matter which their data source is involved? So trying to give them this easy button in these, sky's the falling moment, right? It's probably the worst time in a IT admin's career dealing with these ransomware scenarios. Their entire environment is down. So how do we enable them to have a peace of mind conversation? And, that's all the things I love hearing from our customers is getting these emails on a regular basis. It's the thanks. I no longer have to worry about this. Or probably one of my favorite examples, Kim, was the company that got attacked by ransomware before and after Rubrik. And after they initiated Rubrik, the ransomware actors themselves said, hey, good job switching to Rubrik. You're actually better protected. So that's what keeps us going.
Maybe ransomware didn't pay off and they're looking for a marketing job or an advertisement.
Maybe.
Hey, both of you, where do people go if they want to get more information on Rubrik, or even just more general information on how to protect themselves in a Microsoft 365 environment?
Yeah, I mean, you can go online. You can go to our website, rubrik.com. We actually have a sandbox demo on our website as well. So this is a demo platform that we use, and it's kind of an interactive click through, provision and life cycle process for hands on the keyboard, driver seat experience. With linking a Microsoft 365 subscription with beginning to protect it. So it really gives you a feel for the user experience, the intuitiveness firsthand. So, check that out on our website. We've got a whole Microsoft 365 page. And in particular, too, you might want to check out our Microsoft 365 architecture and security white paper too. So that's a really good in-depth technical thing. But yeah, give it a try too. Sign up for a free trial. Check us out. But we'd love for you to be protected and not suffer from ransomware or have all of these problems, right?
Absolutely. Well, I think this has been an eye-opening bit of information for people who thought Microsoft 365 had them comprehensively covered in terms of backup and recovery and ransomware recovery in particular. So both of you, thank you so much for the information. Again, there's more information on contacting Rubrik or learning more. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.